We will talk this morning about several things that people bring up and have brought up, either here or during the past retreat in Europe, which, as was already mentioned last week, showed so clearly again that we are not different from each other, that the same problems move all human beings. The first thing we want to talk about is this so-called teacher-student relationship. Which, if one enters it without all the habitual emotional responses and images and thoughts, can be something quite different from what we know about teacher-student relationship. People mention time and time again over all these past years into the present, particularly before coming to a meeting, what we used to call doksan, an uneasiness, feeling of outright discomfort, which one has no control over. One sits in the waiting line, one moves up, and now is one's turn to go to see the teacher. Heart pounds or intestines churn. There's a feeling of dis-ease, often outright fear. And intellectually, one can't understand it because one knows this person, one knows there's no reason to be afraid to talk to Toni. But the feeling is there. And it doesn't change, and one doesn't like it. The idea is there, how nice would it be if I could just walk in here calmly. Maybe then I would really get something out of it. Then it could be really much better. If one looks at it carefully, in spite of the pounding heart, because it is entirely possible to look and examine and observe with a pounding heart, with churning intestines, to allow that to go on and look, what are the ingredients of this present dis-ease? There are lots of ingredients. For one thing, one has, since one has been on this earth, been in the presence of people who one thought know more, have power, have the power of reject or approve. And with this goes the tremendous fear of being rejected and the tremendous desire to be approved, to prove oneself. Again, as an opportunity, there's a teacher, it's the same situation, to prove oneself. One has not quite any idea of what there is to be proven, but one has read that something is to be proven, something is to be demonstrated. One can't do it. The feeling of impotence. And there this lurking fear of being rejected, of not coming up to grade, and the ambition to make the grade. So much There's so many aspects of this, so much can be said about it. First of all, if the condition of physical discomfort, the pounding heart, the churning intestine, the crampy stomach, tense muscles, if that has been triggered, it has been triggered by thinking. Some people say, I haven't had a thought, but it all is there. But one has thought. Not all thoughts lie on the surface, on the conscious level. There are unconscious thoughts, particularly in a case like this, the way things always were in the presence of a teacher or parent. And these thoughts and memories trigger this whole physical condition. Immediately, there's no delay there. All these associations are laid down in the brain like a vast network. One thought triggers the whole thing. So it has been triggered. So one sits there with pain in the chest or whatever. What do you do about it? What can you do about it? And this is your first thought. This is one's first feeling. How can I deal with this? This is what people mention, how they put it. How can I deal with this? If you look closely, there is rejection of this state, isn't there? One doesn't want it. It's wrong, it's disturbing, it's a distraction. I could meditate so much better if I didn't have that. The idea that sitting or meditation or zazen is something different from this condition as it is, which it is not. At the instant that this is there, this is it. What is it? Can one sit with it in such a manner that there isn't a quiver of separation? Which means no opposition. Just listening to this. With no one opposing, is that possible? No opposition, no wishing it away? Then it becomes something totally different. Because one isn't naming it, one isn't explaining or recognizing it as, oh, this is my old problem. It isn't your old problem, it's something entirely new. This state of being was never there before, except in your memory. But this is new. And you can't captivate it in words, you can't fixate it. You can, but then it's not this condition and it's just abstracted words. And one may find that everything can function right in the midst of this condition. One can talk, one can listen, one can look and not know, with all of this going on. It needs to be no problem. One doesn't make one out of it. If you think, all right, I'll try this. I've tried it before and it has never worked. I'll try it again, but this time it better work. You don't know whether it'll work or not. It's already a separation. I do this in order for that to happen. This thing is complete in itself. Has its own meaning, its own cause. What is it? As it is, this moment. In careful listening and attending There's no room for thinking further about it, and if there's no thinking, no more will be triggered in the body, mind, because it has come into being because of thinking, consciously or unconsciously, about the teacher, my performance, proving myself, achieving, attaining, being accepted, or maybe being rejected. And this work, this meeting, has nothing to do with that at all, in spite of what has been written in 1,000 books. It is only about what is here, this instant, without any limiting words or memories about it, or expectations of what will happen in the future. That's the process of thinking, which triggers all these, quote, disagreeable, unquote, sensations and emotions. So once they're there, they're there, but they're not what I've been describing. They're what they are, and it's for each one to just be that and function in the midst of it, and not think of it as an obstacle. If you think of it as an obstacle, it is one. The thinking is the obstacle. Recently, someone told me, you ought to be very careful in the way you talk. You may at times project to people the image as though you were perfect, had no images, weren't defensive. And if this happens, then people build up this image of you, and that is part of the problem in relating. And people get this idea of a perfect teacher there. Very true. One has to be very careful in talking. And one has to be very careful in listening, because so quickly something is projected which was not said or falsely remembered. In talking here or in the meeting room, as far as I can see, there's no intention to project an image of a perfect person. That's an idea anyways. This person with whom we were talking said it would be so good if at times you talked about your own defensiveness, so that people see, well, she's not different from me. See, in talking here, the purpose is not to show you what I am. We're looking at defensiveness. And that is not my defensiveness or your defensiveness. It's defensiveness. And if there's really looking at it, then I as a person or you as a person don't come in. That's a conceptual way of thinking about oneself. But defensiveness is there, you can say, in oneself. Can that be observed when it comes up? Not just observed, but felt. The bracing against something that's disagreeable to hear because it does not jibe with the image one has of oneself. I'm like that. I don't want to be seen like this. Or I can't be like that, and one isn't looking. One defends images.
Not you or I, but all human beings do. Maybe we shouldn't say all, because there are moments in which defensiveness does not exist, because one is not identified with an image of oneself as this or that, perfect or imperfect. But it merits looking at this whole thing of trying to make an idea of the teacher, the idea of perfection. Why does one do that if one does it? Because one wants it. Isn't that so? One wants to be associated with a teacher who has all the signs of perfection. And why does one want that? That is what is important, not whether this teacher is perfect or not, but why does one crave that? Again, maybe by being associated with this person, does one feel something will rub off? One usually doesn't even think it through. So one hopes that in the presence of such a person, one may partake of something ideal. Or just wanting to be on the best team with the best coach. Because we're constantly comparing. We always want to be with that which is tops, super. Gives us a temporary, fleeting sense of security, but it does not last. It has no substance because all made up of ideas. And then one crashes if one discovers that this person after all isn't what one had all put into it to build him or her up in one's mind. And there's a tremendous blues and depression, and one looks for another new perfect teacher. And very similar to this, maybe just the other side of the same coin, is an urge to find fault in the person. Not just to see the person as he or she is, but a certain satisfaction, maybe, in finding faults. Maybe because it eases the feeling of guilt about one's own faults, which one cannot accept in the way we were describing before, seeing them for what they are, without immediately associating with the past, just living with it right now as it manifests, really living with it from moment to moment, not knowing the outcome, not knowing whether it'll go away or not, but rather looking for comfort in other people also having these faults. Then I can breathe easy. But one cannot breathe easy. It's also elusive. One has to do this thing over and over and over again, projecting, so that the own feeling of inadequacy needn't be faced. And this is where the work lies. For each human being to face oneself as one is, neither accepting it nor rejecting it, but to see it, to live it, without any separation, no trace of it. Which means not comparing or projecting outward, but the energy gathering in this attention of who am I? What is it? with a curiosity that doesn't immediately jump or run, blame or excuse. So this working together here during a talk or in the office, in the room upstairs, is looking at all of that. It doesn't have to be always verbally, it can be verbally, or can be without words. And in that there are not two people. Something is seen or heard at the same time, without any idea about it, not trying to get satisfaction out of this seeing or hearing, not trying to prove that one hears or sees, just the listening. Then where is the division? Somewhat related to this is something that is often brought up by people saying, either when they come to retreat or talking about their sitting, I get this sort of dull, gnawing feeling I ought to be doing something here that I'm not doing. And that makes me feel guilty. I have a vague feeling of what I should be doing here and that I'm not doing it. And I feel bad about it. When such feelings come up, use the time on the mat to look at it. To allow it to open up. Maybe start thinking about it first. Where does this feeling come from? I should do something. What is it really? Doesn't it come from what one has read? How people worked in such and such a way with such and such energy, hours of day or night to attain enlightenment or illumination, liberation. Or maybe it is much older than that and has to do with what we were just talking about. Do something. Do something right. And not even knowing what right doing is. Everything we do is for a purpose in our life, to make money, to get ahead, to get an education so that we can get a good job. To get better at this. And in the spiritual circles it's called to develop oneself. Become a developed person, a better person. always not working here but toward there, toward a goal. And constantly measuring and comparing also with what other people are doing, and they usually seem to be doing better, or else one seems to be doing better than them. But this work here, in spite of what you may have read or heard or done in the past, has nothing to do with this. It is to see this pattern, this endless pattern of pressure and push, which never comes to any fruition, or if it does, it starts repeating itself because one becomes used to one's achievements and wants more, and feels one is not doing enough. This work here on the mat is for this cycle of straining, trying to gain and gaining, and then being disappointed or becoming indifferent, and the whole cycle starting up again. For this to come into clear awareness in the presence of a mind that is still because it's listening, because it's not caught up in approving or disapproving, wanting to get rid of. So the moment this feeling arises, this dull feeling, I'm not doing enough, question it, zero in on it. What is it? What are you? And listen to it as in detachment, if I can use that word very cautiously, meaning not judging it. Just as you listen to the cicadas. Do you think they shouldn't be doing that? Maybe you think that. Maybe it's distracting from what you want to do, but it's there. And can dull, aching feelings of guilt be allowed to be there without being labeled that?
Not looking toward a time when they will be resolved, but being right now here where they are, and then coming to a state where one doesn't even recognize them as that, but just allowing what is there to be there, unlabeled, unnamed, and to notice how quickly one says, this is my miserable state of being or my joyful state of being. Can one refrain from this is my, but just seeing it for what it is without identifying immediately an owner? Because who is the owner of it? When there's a feeling of guilt, who is the owner of it? Is there me who is not guilty, who has these guilt feelings and therefore judges them as good or bad? Or is at the moment of feeling guilty just all of that? The me is that guilt. If that separation vanishes, then the whole thing takes a different turn. Separation being, I don't want it, I don't like it, I want to overcome it. Again, always this I produced in thought in opposition to what is, which is all the outcome of the I in the first place. The division is illusory. It's a thought. No matter how real it feels, how solidly real it feels that I am a different person from you, of course this body is this body and that body over there is that body. But if there is a listening to what goes on in this body-mind, and this listening, there is not you or me. There's listening. And this current of thinking and emoting and sensing is a current that runs through all human beings. The current of feeling separate and apart and isolated. That is part of this current. Not mine or yours. Just during the past month or so, several different people brought up this problem. One person that was in Germany said, I'm a doctor, and just the other day a young person came and was diagnosed as having terminal cancer. And of course, this is not the first time, it's just the most vivid in my memory. As a matter of fact, it pursues me here on the mat. This young person having to die. And I'm at a loss of how to deal with that. And then other people mentioning their own physical condition, maybe incurable, or a friend dying, or a relative, a child, a mother or sister dying. Again, this question, how do I deal with this? If I knew myself I had terminal cancer, how would I deal with it? Going back to the doctor and the patient, of course a doctor will do everything within his or her realm of knowledge to cure that person. And if I'm sick, I'll go to a doctor, whatever doctor I have confidence in, or try out several to try to be cured of the sickness. But it may be incurable. Do I then go to a doctor to find comfort, either in not being told the truth about my condition, or do I go to anybody to get comforted? This is what we think is our duty in the presence of someone ill, to comfort that person. And we have a very vague idea of what this is. It's often so conventional. Sometimes we feel we haven't learned it, so we feel very awkward. We have no given responses of what to say to the sick person. So if we feel awkward because we don't know what to say and we think not saying anything is also no help. But what is churning inside all the time is I ought to do something for this person. I ought to help him or her. Or how can I help him? How can I make him or her feel better? And oneself feels awful. Afraid of the situation, afraid of dying, afraid of losing this person, and afraid of one's impotence in the presence of death. When it is me and you being sick, what do I know about how you approach this whole thing? Whether you want comfort or lies about your condition. How do I know that? You may not. Maybe an irritation, an irrelevant thing, because a person sick with cancer or whatever may use all one's energies to be with that, to really enter into it completely, to the exclusion of thoughts about the future, what will happen, whether it will get worse or not. And then, what help is it if somebody tries to tell one anything that has not to do with this present state of being? That is not to be put into words. That is only to be felt together, sat with together, without any words. If the patient wishes to talk or ask, then can one listen to the question very, very carefully, where it comes from, and listen to one's desire to give an answer, if one may not have any answer. Can one say that? So that one is together, one is communing. One is reflecting to each other the state of being. The dying person may be free from fear, because being totally with the condition and not thinking about the future, there is no fear. Fear is always connected with thinking about the future or the past. But if thinking is quiet, absent in the presence of listening and being with the state one is in, there's no fear. And one may impose one's own fears upon this person in one's urge to console and comfort. So rather to be aware of one's own fears and be with them as one is with this person, in silence. She may say, what if this person isn't with his or her condition the way it's just been described? This person wants to talk, wants to hear. Well, can you respond as you see it at the moment? Not with any idea of what you ought to do to help this person, but out of listening and being sensitively aware. leaving at the door this burden of having to help. Because help is no help. Help is being with someone, with oneself. But if there's conversation is going on, can it flow freely, without intention, I ought to be saying this or that? Really not knowing what to say, but responding to what is being said. If one is ill oneself with an incurable sickness, something that comes maybe with aging, certain weakening of the body or joints or whatever, one doesn't know whether it's incurable. That's another thing. How do we know? But the symptom is there, the ache is there, the pain or whatever. Again, is there a habitual opposition to it? I don't like that. Why me? Why can't I feel like all the other people who seem at my age so much more this way or that way? It is this opposition which is the disease in human beings, the opposition to the condition. As we said before, whatever can be done, to do it. Not to leave anything untried. It's not a matter of saying pain or suffering is good for me. It isn't good at all. It's pain. But can one detect this opposition? One person told me, I've never really looked at my disability without this anger about it, this resentment about it. And out of this anger and resentment flow innumerable new symptoms which do not help the original condition at all. Whereas an absence of anger and resentment about one's condition, who knows? It would be the absence of poison. But the anger and resentment has to be seen. For that person, it was never even seen that this was a deeply ingrained response to the condition. And maybe in seeing that, the poison leaves, is not poured out anew and anew with every angry thought. It's such a simple thing to detect opposition and resentment, and yet so difficult because we take it so much for granted. It's so habitual. Or we think it's right to fight. And as long as we fight, we don't see what we're fighting. It's not allowed to just be fully revealed, fully there in all its different shades and manifestations. There's a Zen saying which goes something like this: the morning glory, which opens up one morning only, is not different from the giant pine that lives for 1,000 years. Because in this one opening, there's no time, there's no one morning or 1,000 years, and in the 1,000 years, there is no time. Time is thinking, how long will I live? And the fear of dying, that's time. But opening up to what is there, without thought about what was or should be or will be, then there is no time, and therefore no fear. And therefore no limitation, regardless of physical disability or dying. One person asked, "What is happiness?" He never seemed to talk about that at all. Why didn't you talk about it sometime? And what came to mind immediately was that happiness is no problem. It's never brought up in meetings. I'm happy. Can you do something about it? Or how do I deal with my happiness? I remember wondering very often as a teenager what happiness was, and I really looked for it. And the moment I started feeling something which was sort of like happiness, I questioned, is this happiness? And immediately it was gone. It was quite depressing. Whenever one felt good, is this happiness now? Do I have happiness? And with this goes the thought, will this last? Will this now be what I'll, will this be how I can live on? Then it evaporates, and one is left with doubt, with thoughts, and with fears, with a sense of time, that the future may bring anything but happiness. So what is happiness or joy? If we look at it very carefully, there's a lot of what maybe for the sake of proper definition we call pleasure, that goes on merely in thinking. One remembers pleasurable past incidents, and there's a sense of satisfaction one gets out of living in those memories. They may or may not be accurate. When the memory may not include disagreeable times in those pleasurable moments. There's a
way of memory to abstract certain things and drop others. But one gets satisfaction and pleasure out of remembering pleasurable incidents. And this can go on for hours, day or night. One has a boring job and the mind is constantly evoking pleasurable memories or projecting pleasurable times in the future that one will work toward, try to attain. So pleasure can be totally limited to thinking, all the while not being in touch what is actually going on within and without, outside. Being not in touch with that one is walking through a street, the sounds, the sights, the feelings. It's just like being a walking movie theater. A very, very, very dangerous state of being because of this immense separation of what is actually happening. Being out of touch. And then there is a state of being in which one is in touch. There's really a sense of physical well-being, maybe eating a good meal, or sexual touch and well-being, or taking a beautiful hike through the mountains. Freshness of the air, the beauty of the flowers, all these different flowers, different colors, glistening snow in the distance on the mountains. And yet there is this entity inside that wants to get something out of it. You can observe this for yourself. Somehow or other one wants to contain this or keep this. There's already a slight foreboding that this will come to an end, and a certain sadness while one is even walking. Or just trying to get satisfaction out of it. There's an effort involved because there is an entity there who wants to keep. Maybe a certain greed for more of it. So the joy is tainted by that. This is not a judgmental statement, it is so. Because there's division between the one who wants the satisfaction and the beauty of what is actually happening. And in this division lie sorrow, sadness, greed, all the consequences of wanting to have or not wanting to lose. If this can be glimpsed at the moment it's happening, at the moment it comes up, this wanting to get something out of it, or wanting to hold, or even this pleasurable moment reminding one of past pleasurable moments, so that one is not really with what's going on, but with a memory of what did go on. If this can be glimpsed, then the division can close up. The gap closes, and there's just what is going on.
And if there's no gap, if there's no one wanting something out of it, no wanting, no fearing, no trying to give oneself an account of what one is experiencing, because there is no experiencer. There's just whatever's going on, and it is no thing, because there are no words to hold it, to identify it or recognize it, or store it up for future use. This, if it comes up, is glimpsed, is seen, and disappears. Then maybe, can this be described as pure joy? Not pure in any moral sense, but pure because there is no one grabbing, wanting. Trying to use this to fill something inside. There is no inside. And then comes the thought, oh, what was that? And one wants to think about it. And then it becomes a memory. Can one observe that at the moment it happens? And can one observe the moment memories come up and one tries to get something out of them? And see this whole process, its separation, its being a seedbed of trouble and inattention, and remaining with what is going on, not climbing into the movies? The joy of the moment may be gone. Can it be gone and finished? Of course it can. Unless all this other thing happens of looking back, but then you're not looking here. And here is where what? What is it this instant? If I don't want something to happen. And there's no need for expending effort to get someplace, because I'm here. What is it? Listen. We will end here for today.